today. Thank you for... I guess we're in the business of politics. It's the art of possible. So appreciate that your submission puts forward an additional level, but in your own words, it is a harder road to hoe in an already complex and over-regulated area. And let Hansard note we're nodding here. Hansard doesn't reflect
but I
body language.
Made the point that I wrote the submission in conjunction with Timber New South Wales to raise the issue about compliance and judgment, because the excising what your bill does, Senator, does raise a lot of difficult problems which have not been addressed by it.
So you can rest assured the department will be before us this afternoon. The Commonwealth Department will be addressing their role in that bilateral arrangement and their role in reviewing RFAs in a timely manner and working with states around compliance issues. I guess my bill seeks to really uphold the explicit intention of what is a Commonwealth state agreement, and has a whole raft of framework within that with which to regulate and govern a forestry industry in different states. I wasn't seeking to rewrite a whole new framework, knowing where we're at in the cycle. You did also mention tolerance and judgment, and I guess within the existing operations, matters of tolerance, matters of judgment are already assessed and used within the existing framework. It's a matter of whether they are assessed at a state, which court, a state or a federal court, looks at that. And so I guess I don't want people to think that those matters of tolerance and judgment aren't already having to be exercised in the current framework.
Senator, can I just make the point that if the state RFA arrangement's working, then the federal legislation doesn't kick in, so you go back to look at the state stuff. And so part of the RFA structure in the bilateral arrangement, there needs to be tolerance and judgment in that as well, which there's plenty of evidence around where that sometimes is lacking.
Yes, which goes to your implementation issue, which is not something this bill deals with. I just have some questions for Maree. In terms of New South Wales RFAs, do they provide adequate environmental protections in your view?
Oh, absolutely. New South Wales, I guess for some people they would say it's fantastic, for others they would say it's not, is the most heavily regulated native forest industry in the world. Not just in Australia, in the world.
Right.
We have the most heavily regulated set of legislation.
So we can really hold our head up high in terms of having a framework that prioritises environmental outcomes while sustaining a native timber harvesting industry.
Absolutely, yes.
You must also abide, for the public native forest harvest industry, you've got to also abide by integrated forestry operation approvals.
Yes.
Are they onerous?
Oh, Senator, they are more than onerous. They spent about 6 years trying to reform the original IFOA, which was a separate one from the North Coast to the South Coast to the Western Division, and they brought in a coastal IFOA, and the original ones had more than 2,000 sets of compliance requirements.
So anyone suggesting, as there has been a few witnesses today, suggesting that somehow we have weak environmental standards in this country and somehow, the RFA framework itself or, this bill indeed, which just seeks to clarify the ambiguity created by Justice Mortimer's decision, actually means that we're going to see this abdication, shall we say, of care and protection for our environment by the Commonwealth Government.
Not at all, Senator. No, the compliance regime in New South Wales is incredibly onerous and very difficult. That is why you find an awful lot of forestry operators that are doing private native forestry, or more likely, we've got a few that do native plantation forestry, employ a raft of their own foresters and forest ecologists, simply because there is a requirement to be so careful and so precise in order to avoid any form of regulatory punishment from the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority.
Watch out for those guys and girls. There's been some commentary around today to try and minimise the impact on communities and people, and the minimise that somehow it's not a large number, so it doesn't really matter, or we'll just transition people into ecotourism in the forests. I mean, I really would love both Ms Kerr and Ms McCaskill, your comments around that. The flippant way people throw those phrases around when you're dealing with the real human cost, not just of losing your identity and what's obviously intergenerational businesses, but the human toll and the mental health issues.
Deb, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think you guys have had the...
Go whatever is easiest for you.
No, that's fine. Look, I think it's fair to say that for my members, there's a significant amount of concern, not just about their own individual businesses, but about their communities. And I think the number of community groups in Victoria that are on the ground advocating for the timber industry in their communities, both from a local government perspective, like the Timber Towns Victoria, and also community groups that are out there, I think that just spells a whole lot of community concern, regional community concern about the forestry sector in Victoria. And I think there's, it's not just the issue that's before the industry, but, in Victoria we have a government decision to phase out native forestry by 2030. So there's a bit of a double whammy.
Current government. Yeah,
the current government. True. So and it's not just about native forestry in the Gippsland and the eastern part of Victoria. I have a small sawmill in Western Victoria who's getting timber from eastern Victoria and other areas. A lot of mills are getting timber from other regions. So it's not just about them in their local community. It's also where they're accessing those saw logs from. There's contractors, as you heard this morning, harvest and haul operators who have a huge investment in their machinery and a requirement to turn over that machinery on a regular basis. So, the small sawmill I talked about, they only have a small number of employees. There's only a very tiny country town. You basically can't even pick it up on a map. And when I went and visited them, they just said, we don't know how we're going to keep our employees on. We've got not much timber left. Now, we don't know when the next load is coming on. How do we have that conversation with our employees? How do we actually carry on a business that's been in, multiple generations? So it's not just themselves and their employees, but you're talking about businesses that have been around for generations. So certainly mental health is an issue. Certainly they're worried and concerned about business stability. They're worried about their future. They're worried about their communities, historically structural adjustment in regional communities, seeing the local football team go and the local netball team go and, community infrastructure that becomes stranded. So these communities are very, very concerned. They support their local industry. Community groups support their local industry and they want a vibrant industry to go forward.
Ms Gaskell?
Senator McKenzie, without showing my age, I'm coming up to almost 50 years in advocacy for not-for-profit organisations, having started out in animal welfare as most of my early career and conservation and zoological park sport. So I've got a very broad, diverse industry as well as agriculture. So I've got a very diverse background. For all of those 50 years, I have been listening to the argument that ecotourism is going to save the world in Australia. I need to put it very firmly in place. Since COVID hit, in March in New South Wales in a large way. Most of the tourism facilities closed. It failed. The timber industry kept going and employing people all the way through. So I think it's really important to understand that tourism isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. I've seen a number of ecotourism businesses fold. I've seen ecotourism lodges go broke, because you make the assumption that if you are interested in ecotourism, everybody is. We're facing right now the prospect of a Great Koala National Park being proposed for Coffs Harbour. How ridiculous. Most tourists who want to go and see koalas want to see them close up. They are not going to spend a week in 300,000 hectares looking for a koala. They will go to Taronga Zoo, Sydney Zoo, or one of those so they can go quickly and look at a koala. So essentially, this ecotourism myth is a myth. And I've got 50 years of listening to this consistently being put forward as an alternate for agriculture, for industry and a variety of other things. I think we need to understand both can exist, but you need some grassroots opportunities for people in rural regional New South Wales for employment, and they can't just turn into baristas and people working in tourist lodges.
Oh, mate.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. Yep. Just wanted to go to the ambiguity created by the decision and a letter from the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, and I quote from it that this decision has created uncertainty for forestry operators in New South Wales RFA areas who rely on the 3 New South Wales long-term RFAs to ensure availability of future wood supply. This is to our Commonwealth Environment Minister, Susan Lee. Strongly urging her to pursue any necessary actions to provide certainty for the New South Wales RFAs and reaffirm the intentions of the Commonwealth in relation to RFAs and the EPBC Act. Very, very small little questions. Was ambiguity created and uncertainty created by the Mortimer decision for the forestry industry?
Absolutely. I think, would you agree, Stuart?
That's the evidence we've had from foresters and the broader industry.
Yeah, look, I understand that. From where you sit in the forestry industry, yes, the issue's been highlighted. I would say as a lawyer, the issue actually was embedded in the original drafting.
Well, you can knock yourselves out with the Law Council on that one. I'm just interested in the evidence we've had from forest industry is that it has led to great uncertainty and there is ambiguity that this bill seeks to address. I want to thank you for your evidence. Great to see you.